Hello and welcome back to Arts of Hermes. My name is Matthew Vaughn and this is the sixth entry in the series on occulture, and we'll be looking here at the works of the artist and writer Leonora Carrington. No need to have seen any of the previous videos in the series. You might want to take a look at the first video where I introduced the concept of occulture and some of the overall themes and approaches in this series. You might also take a look at the fourth entry in the series, the long three-part video on surrealism. Carrington is a surrealist artist, and having some of that more broader background knowledge of surrealism might enhance your understanding of the things that we're talking about here, but definitely not necessary. I will also note here, so I'm recording this little intro partway through the recording process, just to note that note a couple of things. First of all, the whole recording process for this video has been a bit of a disaster. I think the video is good. I'm excited to share it. Carrington is one of my absolute favorite artists and writers, but the process of putting this all together has been a bit of a mess, and a lot's been going on. Both my partner and I have been kind of sick off and on for the last week and a half, and a bunch of other stuff has happened too. So this video is already like a week or even more than a week later than I had intended to get it out. And also it's gotten quite long, and I'm going to split it into three parts. So you'll notice throughout the first part and probably into the second part as well, I will refer to the video as if it were made up of two parts, but it will actually be three. So what was part one will be split between parts 1 and 2 of this new ordering. And then in part 2, we will also look at the novella, The Stone Door. And then in part 3, we will focus on the novel, The Hearing Trumpet. So yeah, in just a moment, I will start talking about it as if it's a two-part series, but hopefully this will make a little more sense now. Yeah, thanks for your patience with all this, and I hope you enjoy the video. Yeah. This video is really going to focus on Carrington's works. In particular, we'll be focused on esotericism and spirituality in Carrington's works, though esotericism is so interwoven into really everything that she did all across her entire career. There's not really a lot of picking and choosing that we have to do in that regard. It's simply everywhere that we look, and even really closely interwoven with other major themes and concepts and images that we find throughout her works. One thing we'll be looking less at will be, or not emphasizing so much, will be her biography. I think in a lot of works on Carrington, a lot of especially essays and sort of podcasts and videos and things like that, I think the focus on her life story or putting that center stage comes, well, both at a disservice to the works, of course, but even to her life, which was to such a very great extent focused on creating these works. And I think we do, I don't know, a better service to her and her legacy by focusing on the things that she herself focused on and what she intentionally put out into the world. Now, this is true of any creator, of course, but with Carrington, there are certainly aspects of her life that are inseparable from her works, and events and things from her life appear in her works, so we won't avoid it entirely. But yeah, it will not be our main focus. All right, so we'll add more details about her biography as they become necessary as they go along. But just for an extremely brief sketch, we can just say that Carrington was born in 1911 to a very wealthy family in Lancashire in the north of England. Although very wealthy, her father's family had made their money in textile manufacturing. Although very wealthy, they were still bourgeoisie. They were not part of the aristocracy, but they, like many other bourgeois families at that time, aspired to gaining access to the world of the nobility. And so a very common strategy was to marry off a daughter to an aristocrat. And so as the only girl among her siblings, there were great hopes placed on Leonora to marry an aristocrat and to get the family, access to those noble circles. But Leonora rebelled against this expectation, as she did against so many other expectations in her life. She was expelled from several schools as a child for refusing to conform to what was expected of a young lady, and just at every turn really decisively and strongly followed, her own path and her own inclinations. Leonora was very deeply interested in art from a very young age and managed to convince her family to let her study art and attend art school. During this time, I think she was about 20 years old, her mother bought her a copy of Herbert Reed's book on Surrealism, which is a really important early English language study of the Surrealist movement. And this book had a really big impact on Carrington. A little bit after this time, she met Max Ernst while he was in England for an exhibition of his works. I mentioned Ernst, and we talked about some of his works back in the Surrealism video, a few videos back in the Culture series. And I'd love to do a full-length look at Ernst's works at some point. I think he's a very powerful and an important esoteric artist in his own right. But in any case, Carrington and Ernst began a relationship to which Carrington's family very strongly objected. They were not married and made no interest in getting married. Actually, Ernst was already married. Ernst was currently on his second marriage, so he was not only married but also divorced and separated from his wife. He was, I think, 25 or 26 years Carrington's senior, and just in absolutely no sense a suitable partner in her family's eyes. Her father actually threatened to have Ernst arrested on the grounds that his exhibition, the art in his exhibition, was obscene, despite knowing that arrest for Ernst would mean deportation back to Germany. And with the Nazis in power, this carried a very strong possibility that Ernst would be killed if he was deported back to Germany. In any case, she and Ernst sort of ran away to Cornwall for a while. She had a sort of final sort of confrontation with her father that did not go well, and she and Ernst left together to go to France. Carrington and Ernst lived together in Paris for a time, where she was introduced to many of the other members of the Surrealist movement and participated in some of their activities there. Eventually, at least partially to escape from Ernst's wife, she and Ernst moved to a house in a more rural area. After the war with Germany broke out, Ernst, who was a German citizen, was arrested. Eventually he was released, but then after the armistice, he was arrested a second time, this time by the Gestapo. He did eventually manage to escape and make it to the United States, but during this time, Carrington began to suffer from an intense psychological crisis. A friend helped her escape and get to Spain, where she was hospitalized for a time. This period is documented in her memoir down below, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. After her hospitalization, she met a man, Renato Leduc, a Mexican journalist that she had known from Paris. Met him at the embassy in Lisbon, and then in order to help her get out of Spain, they married and came to New York, where they lived together for a time before moving to Mexico City. She and Leduc didn't remain together for very long, and they divorced not long after coming to Mexico City. A few years after that, in I think it was 44 or 45, she married Chiki Weiss, who is a Hungarian photographer who is Jewish and had escaped also from the Nazis and come to Mexico City. They remained married until Weiss's death. They also had 2 children together. And Carrington remained in Mexico City for the rest of her life, associating with a lot of the other surrealists and other sort of refugees and European expats who had fled during the time of the war. She also became very close friends with Remedios Varo, an artist we've mentioned a few times already in this series, and we'll definitely talk about again at some point in the future. She did spend some time, particularly in the latter portion of her life, living in the United States, just on and off, usually just for a few months at a time, in New York City for career-related reasons. Though she did also have an extended stay in Chicago in the late 60s when, following on the explosion of student protests in 68, the Mexican government cracked down quite heavily and violently, and Mexico City became an unsafe place to live. And so During that time, while she was in Chicago, she associated with the group of young American surrealists there, including Penelope and Franklin Rosemont, whom we mentioned back in the Surrealism video there. And so she's one, among a few others, of important links between that younger American generation and the older Parisian, European group of surrealists. Carrington died in 2011 in her mid-90s, and at least as far as I know, for some time before her death, she was the only living member of that original pre-war group of surrealists in Paris. All right, so let's do as promised and start taking a look at some of Carrington's works. So in part 2 of this video, we'll focus in on the longer writings. So this will be primarily the novel, The Hearing Trumpet, but we'll also have at least a little bit of discussion on the shorter work, the novella, The Stone Door. But here for the rest of part 1, we'll look at some of the shorter writings as well as a number of her paintings. And I've organized them somewhat loosely according to theme and some of the, not a sort of definitive or absolute list or anything like that, but some of the major themes that we find in Carrington's works. So let's see, we'll look at myths and fairy tales, and then spirituality, mysticism, paganism, Wicca. And then we will spend a bunch of time talking about esotericism, and including all the really major branches of esotericism, including magic, ritual, and witchcraft, astrology, and alchemy, as well as the tarot, which is a major component of her work. And then finally, towards the end, we will sort of open up a bit and look at her deep interest in animals and ecology, and her interest in feminism and ecofeminism as well, and look at some of those themes in her work. Images and narratives drawn from myth and fairy tale are, I think, extremely important and prominent element in all of Carrington's works, both the written and visual, and all throughout her entire career. Even extending back to her pre-surrealist works, like when she was in art school and in her adolescence. Now, before Susan Aberth's really pioneering work on drawing forth the prominence and importance of esotericism in Carrington's works, it was really through the lens of myth and fairy tale that her work was mostly understood up until that time. So although it's important to push back against seeing her work simply through that lens, that doesn't mean that it's not extremely important. And so I think it makes a good place to start our discussion here. I think this is also a good place to talk about something that I think, well, a couple of things actually, that both make Carrington's work very powerful and enchanting, but can also be challenging, is that although she's drawing from traditions, established, whatever, mythic traditions, or as we'll see, various esoteric traditions, she is, simultaneously combining together elements from different traditions, and also modifying things to suit her own purposes. So her work is simultaneously extremely cosmopolitan, drawing on traditions from all over the world throughout time, so extremely wide-ranging and broad, and drawing in elements from all these different places, and is sort of eclectic, I guess we could say, in that way, but is also extremely personal at the same time. And I think that combination, I think I found a little bit frustrating, when I first started looking at her works, is I would, and be like, oh, I know what that symbol is. I know what myth is being used here. But then you're like, well, wait, but I don't actually understand, what's happening in the painting. So I think understanding the specific references that are being used in the works are necessary, but not sufficient to understanding them. And I think we have to just sort of go in keeping that in mind, that it's important to recognize those things, but that won't simply hand us the answer. She's not she's never using these images or symbols or narratives as pre-packaged meanings that she can simply combine together or sort of spruce up for presentation. But there's always a very deep, very personal processing happening. So yeah, I think it's just very important to be aware of that. I think also it's really important to be aware, and I think the connection to surrealism really makes this clear, that her works are, I think, very often speaking to deeper parts of ourselves. And this may go some way towards talking about her resistance to trying to explain her works, is that to put them into words is always really unsatisfying. I mean, I've seen, essays and things like that where the meaning of a painting or something like that has been unpacked and explained, and it's always really unsatisfying. It never really seems to capture the magic and the power of her work. So I think, and again, I think this is a challenging thing, that we need to use that intellect to recognize all the various traditions and symbolism that she's drawing on, but also set that aside and let the works just really speak to the deeper, intuitive, sort of unconscious aspect of the self. And yeah, again, although that makes things challenging, it also makes them really, really powerful. And I think it makes long-term engagement with her works really rewarding and valuable. All right, so just to be a little more specific here about some of the interest in myth and fairy tale, one thing that's really prominent all throughout her works is interest in Celtic mythology. Now, Carrington's mother was Irish, and she also had an Irish nanny who would tell her, Celtic and Irish fairy stories throughout her childhood. So this was a very strong early impression. And I think also this sort of blending of, she was also raised Catholic. Her mother was Irish Catholic. And I think her father converted, if I'm remembering correctly now, when her parents married, if I'm remembering correctly. But I think in her mind as a child, all this sort of Celtic mythology kind of blended together with the Catholic mythology. And I think we will definitely see Christian imagery, especially Catholic imagery, throughout her works. But as with all the other traditions, she's freely adapting and modifying these things. And in particular with Catholic imagery, she's very often using them in a satirical way or even a very subversive way. So we'll see in particular the sort of twisting of Christian patriarchal images in a very feminist sort of way. So there can even be a kind of, hostile might be a slightly too strong word, but a kind of subversive intention in the way that she's using some of these images, especially when it comes to Christian imagery, though some Jewish as well, especially after her marriage to Cheeky Weiss, who was Jewish. More sort of Jewish images appear in her works, which she's never quite as hostile as she is with the Catholic images. Or heretical, I suppose. But again, there's always this something of an antagonism towards to patriarchal images, and her understanding of the history that those those traditions carry with them. Also, I think it's worth noting that early childhood experience of the sort of blending together of Celtic myth and magic with Catholic tradition also gave her a certain way of relating to Mexican tradition, and really, I think she really responded to that, a similar sort of blending of indigenous magical pagan traditions with Catholic tradition that she found again while she was in Mexico. And we will definitely see some Mexican imagery, in particular the Quetzalcoatl, the winged serpent or the plumed serpent, will appear in some of her works. The image we see on the screen here is drawn from Celtic mythology. We see the white people who are what we now sort of know as fairies, but in their original sort of form, rather than this sort of domesticated kind of harmless form that we see now. All right, now we have a really nice example, I think, of Carrington's use and sort of manipulation of different mythological traditions and images and references, and her ability to draw them together into a complex but intriguing, enchanting whole. So this is Are You Really Serious? Whose title is a pun there on the name of the star, Sirius, which we see in the sky in the upper center of the painting. Now, the appearance of that particular star in combination, in the context of the Egyptian motifs that we see here in the painting, sets us thinking about the place of Sirius in Egyptian mythology and the sacred calendar. The heliacal rising of Sirius was connected to the Nile flood, which was the major event of the Egyptian year. Sirius was identified with the goddess Sothis and also closely associated with Isis as well, and images of goddesses or other sort of magical or divine enchanted feminine figures are certainly a constant theme throughout Carrington's works. But we also have her here now with Sirius. She's drawing not just on the Egyptian traditions connected to that star, but also to the Western traditions, where we're seeing Sirius as the bright star in the constellation Canis Major, the larger dog, and so we see dogs here as well. So we have these larger maybe perhaps sacred guardians, these sort of dog figures, one of whom is actually covered in hieroglyphics itself. We also see on the right-hand side, there's the two pillars there, and on the left pillar, we see a group of jackal-headed figures. So obviously referencing Anubis from Egyptian myth, but these are perhaps priests or other magical beings here, perhaps engaged in some sort of ritual around this pillar. We also have, just to the left of those figures, we have a dancer here who appears to be a non-Egyptian African figure, so perhaps connecting Egyptian tradition to the larger and older African traditions. And then on the far left, we also have some sort of a goddess or other magical figure there, we engaged in weaving, so perhaps related to the fates, who weave fate, which we might connect to stars, into astrology, which are connected to fate and the divining of fate, or the star's ability to speak our fates or to write them. A lot more that we could say about this painting here, but let's just keep moving on. All right, so now I want to talk about an important writing of Carrington's. This is down below, her memoir of the period of psychological crisis and of psychosis that she experienced, that we referenced a few minutes ago. So this memoir is being written about 3 years after these experiences, and over the course of just 5 days. And the sections, the 5 sections of the memoir are dated for the day that she is writing that section. So it's written and from Monday the 23rd through Friday the 27th of August 1943. And both this method of organization and the dating of the sections according to when she's writing it, rather than when the events occurred, I think draws out the fact that the work is in a way as much about the process of remembering and making sense, and setting forth and communicating this experience as it is about the experience of itself. There's a work of processing and integrating and interpreting that's going on here. And in the story of what happened in 1940, we get the story of crisis and of trauma, leading out of the down below, leading out of this sort of underworld realm, back into healing, and back out of this crisis, but that's also seems to be repeated in 1943 as she revisits this period and experiences these things again. Even finding herself in 1943, kind of in the middle of this process of writing, really submerged back into some of those same feelings and almost overwhelmed by them, but understanding that just as then, she has to continue on through the end to come out the other side. And I think that, I think that helps to draw out that the initiatory and even kind of magical alchemical dimension of this work, that although traumatic and horrific and remaining so in 1943, 3 years later, it is also an initiatory experience that changes and transforms her. And we can see things that occur in Down Below, various images and ideas reoccurring throughout her work. So it's also, I think, a really important piece of her entire work. However, unpleasant it is for her. All right, so I've pulled out a handful of quotation excerpts from the work that I'm just going to read through, and I'll make a few comments about. I'm really just going to focus here on drawing out some of the esoteric, especially the more hermetic, philosophical dimensions of the work, and not really focus on the narrative of the things that happened to her. That narrative aspect of it, I think, is pretty straightforward and is written in pretty clear, simple language. Even if the experience that she's narrating is of a very chaotic, unclear, shifting sort of reality. I think if you're interested in that aspect of it, definitely just go and read the work. It's pretty short. I mean, you can definitely read it in an afternoon. But so we'll just pull out some excerpts of the more esoteric, philosophical sort of aspects of the work. I think there could definitely be a question with some of these passages, like including this one that we're about to read here, of how much of this was actually happening in 1940 and how much of this is coming from the process of interpreting and making sense of this experience in 1943. How much of this is something being layered onto those experiences as a way of using her esoteric studies to give form and meaning to these experiences of psychosis. And I think that is not just unanswerable, but ultimately an unimportant question. I think the work is very clearly framed as what it is, this kind of process of reflecting on that period as well as reflecting on the process of reflecting, and that the transformative and initiatory aspect of it is as much about processing the experience as it is about the actual experience itself, that the initiation is at least as much in 1943 as it is in 1940, if that makes any sense. So anyways, this first excerpt is from quite early on in the work, and she is alone at the house after Ernst's second arrest, and really just beginning the period of crisis here. So she writes, "I wept for several hours down in the village. Then I went up again to my house, where for 24 hours I indulged in voluntary vomitings, induced by drinking orange blossom water and interrupted by a short nap. I hoped that my sorrow would be diminished by these spasms, which tore at my stomach like earthquakes. I know now that this was but one of the aspects of those vomitings. I had realized the injustice of society. I wanted first of all to cleanse myself, then go beyond its brutal ineptitude. My stomach was the seat of that society, but also the place in which I was united with all the elements of the earth. It was the mirror of the earth, the reflection of which is just as real as the person reflected. That mirror, my stomach, had to be rid of the thick layers of filth, the accepted formulas, in order to properly, clearly, and faithfully to reflect the earth. And when I say the earth, I mean, of course, all the earths, stars, suns in the sky, and on the earth, as well as the stars, suns, and earths of the microbes' solar system." So we've got a complex group of concepts here. Now, all of them are relating to something that becomes a really dominant theme throughout here of the Hermetic concept of the microcosm and the macrocosm, or what is often given as the maxim as above, so below, where now this can be interpreted in a number of different ways or on a number of different planes, but the basic understanding being the individual as a kind of miniature cosmos, so that the individual, typically this is the individual human, is a kind of cosmos in miniature and reflects the whole. Now, this can be extended in a variety of ways, as we see her doing here. So first of all, one of the aspects that we have here is her sense of her own crisis and her own body, and its pains and torments, reflecting what's happening in the society. Right. This is France is now under Nazi rule, and even after she gets to Spain, Spain has fairly recently been through a civil war, and has been Franco is now in power, is now under fascist rule. So her awareness of these terrible things happening in the society around her is really a big part of her experience, and remains a theme throughout the work. Now, early on in the periods of acute psychosis, she sometimes has a kind of messianic sense that because she is this microcosm, because the society is reflected in her, that this makes her specially chosen to be able to save society. But we will see how, and I think it's very important the way in which that idea and that sort of messianic sense of her own importance and kind of world-defining destiny that she has here, the particular way in which that idea is healed and worked through, I think is very important. All right, so now she and the friend who's picked her up and driven her to Spain they've arrived in Madrid. So she writes, "In Madrid, we put up at the Hotel Internacional near the railway station, leaving it later for the Hotel Roma. At the Internacional, we dined that first night on the roof. To be on a roof answered for me a profound need, for there I found myself in a euphoric state. In the political confusion and the torrid heat, I convinced myself that Madrid was the world's stomach, and that I had been chosen for the task of restoring this digestive organ to health. I believed that all anguish had accumulated in me and would dissolve in the end, and this explained to me the force of my emotions. I believed that I was capable of bearing this dreadful weight and of drawing from it a solution for the world. The dysentery I suffered from later was nothing but the illness of Madrid taking shape in my intestinal tract." Just developing some of what we just mentioned a minute ago there.
All right, I've had an interruption in the recording here, so I'm trying to pick back up where we left off. So this passage that you're seeing now on the screen is from the second day of her writings, and she's reflecting on the process of writing and her own sort of ability to recall and express her experiences of 3 years earlier. So she writes, "I am afraid I'm going to drift into fiction, truthful but incomplete, for lack of some details which I cannot conjure up today and which might have enlightened us. This morning the idea of the egg came again to my mind, and I thought that I could use it as a crystal to look at Madrid in those days of July and August 1940. For why should it not enclose my own experiences, as well as the past and future history of the universe? The egg is the macrocosm and the microcosm, the dividing line between the big and the small, which makes it impossible to see the whole. To possess a telescope without its other essential half, the microscope, seems to me a symbol of the darkest incomprehension. The task of the right eye is to peer into the telescope, while the left eye peers into the microscope." All right, so a lot of really rich material here. Let's see. So the egg image here is a really common symbol that we find all throughout her works. We find lots of eggs. As with all symbols in her works, I think we need to resist giving it a single, definite, fixed meaning. We see, I think in a lot of her works, there's an alchemical reference to the egg as the alchemical vessel, and connected to other alchemical imagery. She also used eggs in the actual material creation of her art for quite a while. Her preferred medium for painting was egg tempera. So even the materials that she's using have some of these same resonances with the egg and the importance of that symbol in her work. The egg, of course, is a fertility symbol, particularly linked to feminine fertility and the creative generative power. Eggs also play an important role in a number of cosmologies from around the world, where the universe is created from an egg, or the original creation is an egg, being laid by some sort of primordial being. So a lot of really rich resonances with eggs. Let's see. I think interesting up towards the top there, where she says that she could use the egg as a crystal to look at Madrid. This, of course, is a reference to the process of scrying, of gazing into a crystal or a blackened mirror to achieve vision. So there's a kind of divinatory sort of intent here. Which is quite interesting that now, in just trying to access her own memories and to understand them, that she's actually understanding this as a kind of divinatory, there's an actual magical component to her attempt to essentially scry back into the past and to understand the social conditions around her. This line about the egg enclosing her own experience as well as the past and future history of the universe. I think it's quite interesting here that in this line we get, or in this passage, we have resonances with the actual content of her psychosis at this time, but I think now understood in a very different way, and that's, I think, something we can continue to develop as we go along here, the way that the content of her delusions and ideas that were tormenting her at this time were not simply rejected, but were processed and incorporated into in a genuine, healthy, esoteric vision. I think it's quite interesting also here that the egg is seen as a dividing line between the big and the small that makes it impossible to see the whole. I think a more standard understanding of microcosm and macrocosm would see both the microcosm and the macrocosm as each the whole, or images of the whole. But it's interesting, I think, to see there being a kind of fundamental division between the micro and macro. They are in a way identified because they are mirrors or images of each other. But there is also this split, which is only sort of reconciled by each one of the two eyes, one looking into the telescope and the other looking into the microscope, one looking at the macro structure and the other looking at the microstructure simultaneously, which of course would be a very split sort of experience. You would have two extremely different images that you would have to hold in place at the same time. I think there's something really rich about that suggestion that those two, and the kind of tension or contradiction between the micro and the macro simply has to be accepted and understood, and that the egg, which is, of course, is an image of wholeness and completion and fullness, is also linked to division. I think is a very potent dialectical sort of image here. All right, so now we're going to jump a bit ahead to the period where she's in the asylum now. She's been hospitalized, and we're going to look at a few of the main elements of the narrative and some of the esoteric symbolism that she's investing, not just the process of her treatment and recovery, but even the landscape of the grounds of the asylum here. So we see on the right, this is a map that she's drawn, a rather fanciful map, but kind of symbolic map, elaborating on the geography and layout and some of the significances and meanings that different parts of the facility had for her. There's a lot there, and you can definitely study it in connection with reading through the text. We're just going to focus on a few of the key elements here. All right, and we're not going to worry about every single detail in the context here, but this is just her describing the daily routine of her care. So she says, Frau Asaguerda would come in for my bath and then would take me to the sunroom. So this is the building here that she is staying in, and then this is the sunroom. So we see the blazing sun image right there. Here I was rid of all my familiar objects, which, belonging to the troubled and emotional past, would have darkened my labors. So she's talking about the objects, the various items that she had with her at the time that she was brought into the facility, which have all become invested with very specific symbolic meanings for her at this time. But this divestment from them is part of a process of purification and cleansing that she's undergoing. Here I was alone and naked, with my bed sheet and the sun, the sheet united to my body in a dance. Here in the sunroom, I felt I was manipulating the firmament. I had found that what was essential to solving the problem of myself in relation to the sun. I believed that I was being put through purifying tortures so that I might attain absolute knowledge, at which point I could live down below. So this is down below here, the image of the black sun. So this name down below is actually the word that the people there were using, but it becomes invested in a kind of underworld significance. So we see the sunroom and then this sort of black sun symbolism that she uses here to set up a kind of dichotomy between these two areas within the facility. So she says, the pavilion with this name was for me the earth, the real world, paradise, Eden, Jerusalem. So see her investing aspects of the facility with mythological content. Paradise, Eden, Jerusalem. This, of course, being more like the heavenly Jerusalem, from like the Book of Revelation, than that, the literal city on earth. All right, so more or less continuing on here. Also, I should note, the underlining that you're seeing in these passages is not mine. I was too lazy to scan my own copy of the book, so I just found a copy online and grabbed screenshots from that, but it had somebody else's underlining in it. So just do your best to ignore that. Not intentional. Anyways, continuing on here, she says, Don Luis and Don Mariano were God and his son. So Don Mariano is the director of the facility, and Don Luis is his son, who also works here. So those two roles are being, in a pretty straightforward way, expanded to a cosmological and theological significance. I thought they were Jewish. I thought that I, a Celtic and Saxon Aryan, was undergoing my sufferings to avenge the Jose for the persecutions they were being subjected to. Later, with full lucidity, I would go down below, right, the building that we talked about there. I would go down below as the third person of the Trinity. I felt that through the agency of the sun, I was an androgyne, the moon, the Holy Ghost, a gypsy, an acrobat, Leonora Carrington, and a woman. I was also destined to be, later, Elizabeth of England. I was she who revealed religions and bore on her shoulders the freedom and the sins of the earth, changed into knowledge, the union of man and woman with God and the cosmos, all equal between them. So we see here the arising of more alchemical symbolism of the androgyne, the marriage of the sun and moon, and the unification of man and woman, even God and the cosmos, this idea of the kind of unification of opposites that continues to be a theme all the way throughout her work. And now we also see her beginning to install herself into the Christian Trinity in a rather, I think, a way that is echoed by a lot of her later engagements with Christian symbolism, and I think, as we've already mentioned, taking those ideas and concepts and twisting them around to new purposes, even for kind of feminist satirical sort of purposes at times, but always with some element of genuine magical spiritual intention. And it's interesting to see these ideas, arising here, during this period of crisis in her life. And it's continuing on. She says, with a few pieces of paper and a pencil Jose had given me, I made calculations and deduced that the father was the planet Cosmos, represented by the sign of the planet Saturn. The sun was the sun, and I the moon, an essential element of the Trinity, with a microscopic knowledge of the earth, its plants and creatures. I knew that Christ was dead and done for, that I had to take his place, because the Trinity minus a woman and microscopic knowledge had become dry and incomplete. Christ was replaced by the Son. I was Christ on earth in the person of the Holy Ghost. So we have a kind of almost supersession, of this Christian patriarchal order, and it is rearranged and reconfigured so that now the woman as the moon becomes both the Holy Ghost as well as the incarnation on Earth, associating that in particular with the microscopic knowledge. We also get, I think, a very definite astrological, cosmological setup here, where the father as Saturn is the slowest and most distant, the furthest out of the classical planets, and then the moon is the closest and fastest of the planets, the one most associated with not just femininity but materiality and incarnation. And then the sun is the center point, sort of halfway between the extremes of above and below. And then finally, towards coming into the conclusion of the narrative, she finally is able to go down below and to descend into this world, which is also her access to to Eden, or to the heavenly Jerusalem and the center of the world. All right, so she describes the down below building. She says there were 3 stories. In each a door was open. I could see in the rooms, on the night tables, other solar systems as perfect and complete as my own. Jerusalem knew already. They had penetrated the mystery at the same time as I. So this, I think, is a really important key and an important moment in the story, that her... or the moving towards healing here and the giving up of, or the overcoming of this messianic sense of her own importance that she experiences during her crisis is not about moving back into the established reality, what is ordinarily kind of considered reality that she had been immersed in before this time, but instead a kind of integrating or normalizing and universalizing of this reality, that rather than giving up her sense of being a microcosm or a solar system, as she's putting it here, she is instead extending that revelation out to all others. Continuing on, she says, on the 3rd floor, I came upon a small Ogivale door. It was closed. I knew that if I opened it, I would be in the center of the world. I opened it and saw a spiral staircase. I went up and found myself in a tower, a circular room lighted by 5 bullseye windows, one red, one green, the earth and its plants, one translucent, the earth and its men, one yellow, the sun, and one mauve, the moon, night, the future. So again, seeing different permutations of these central elements of this kind of cosmology that she's constructing here of earth, sun, moon. Let's see, a wooden column which served as an axis for this strange place. So here we get a kind of image of the axis mundi, the center. In the center of the world, we have a central axis around which everything turns. An axis for this strange place jutting from the ceiling, passed through the center of a pentagonal table, which was laid with a small, torn red tablecloth covered with dust. I took the great disorder which reigned on this table for the handiwork of God and his Son, disorder among the various objects that were there, disorder in the cogs of the human machinery which, immobilized, kept the world in anguish, war, want, and ignorance. So again, as we've said before, that investing these particular objects or these particular places with this kind of macrocosmic significance, as if that she's gone through a kind of cosmic and even sort of theological journey here, and also that this sense of adding this feminine and microscopic perspective and lunar perspective into the male trinity, which has reigned over the war and anguish and disorder that has characterized the world, I think is a significant element here too. That maybe that resonates also with what we were just saying about not returning to the previous world in the process of healing, right? Because that what the previous world was the patriarchal world, the world that also produced the Nazi regime and Franco and fascism and World War II and all the suffering around her, but moving through to something to new and to envisioning a path toward healing, which we will see as a constant concern in all of her work. All right, so now she begins to manipulate the objects in the room in magical fashion. She says, I began by laying down the disc next to the column and by placing on top of it 2 pieces of wood, male and female. Again, this idea of the conjunction or unification of the opposites here. I then poured all the gold dust over them, thus covering the world with riches. I then placed the saucers inside the tanks and the Jesus Christ medal in the Franco box in my pocket. I opened all the windows, as I would have opened those of consciousness. All right, so let's just wrap up our look at down below there. There's so much more that we could say, but hopefully you've got some basic coordinates for what's going on here and some indication of some of these symbols and the kinds of approaches that she will continue to work with throughout the rest of her career and to integrate this experience and its implications as she moves forward. All right, so let's just move along here, and we can just talk briefly about her interest in spirituality and its presence in her works. Now, this spiritual element will be totally interwoven with basically everything else we'll talk about for the rest of this video, especially the esoteric interest. But I think it's just worth highlighting that I think perhaps contrary to the way that esotericism in art is sometimes discussed, I think it's just worth highlighting how that there is a really deeply felt and deep spiritual engagement running throughout all of this for her. We also know that she engaged in a number of spiritual practices and spiritual systems throughout her life. Many of these of her own sort of creation. As we mentioned, she was very eclectic, drawing from a number of different traditions. We'll continue to talk about that as we get into the specifically esoteric interests. But also, it's just worth noting that she practiced and participated for a while in some fourth way groups, so groups associated with P.D. Ouspensky and G.I. Gurdjieff. Though she remained pretty ambivalent about those groups, and we'll actually see when we get to the hearing trumpet. We'll look at the hearing trumpet in part 2. We'll see her satirizing some of the pretensions of these groups. Also quite interested in Tibetan Buddhism for a period of her life, and I think we can see some of that influence of that Buddhist perspective, especially the more like tantric and magical elements of Vajrayana Buddhism in her work. Anyways, this is just, I thought, an interesting quotation. This is from an interview that she did later in her life. So she was asked about religion and spirituality and things. And she says, I am not an expert on religion, but I think that all religions have something, plenty of goddesses and gods. I also think there are thousands of them, and I also think that we don't know the meaning of the word God. I think there are animal gods. There are micro gods of the subatomic worlds. So I think that in particular that last line about the micro gods of the subatomic worlds resonates in an interesting way with some of what we just saw in down below with the microscope and the microscopic view of things. I think it also speaks to what I suppose, for lack of a better term, we could call a kind of animist sort of sense that we get from some of her works, where the whole world seems to be teeming with various sorts of intelligences and creative, transformative power. That the whole world seems to be imbued with spirit and life and intelligence. I just think it's interesting to see that reflected in her own sense of divinity and its presence in the world. All right, so now getting into the heart of this video here, we can take a look at some of the different elements and dimensions of the esotericism within her art. Maybe the first thing to notice is just the general atmosphere of magical and esoteric practice throughout her works. So here in this painting, The Candle Game, from the mid-1960s. We don't necessarily specifically recognize the magical glyphs, the sigils along the top, or the glyphs on these kind of cubic objects down in the front, or the specific layout of the ritual space and the arrangement of the candles. But these elements, along with the geometric elements, the presence of what seem to be spiritual sort of energies or powers, swirling and spiraling through the scene, the presence of sacred animals, what appear to be a few ritual practitioners here, certainly give us
us the atmosphere of ritual and magic and presence and esoteric significance, even if it's not always easy to decode exactly what's going on here. And I think, again, maybe this highlights that sense that her works are speaking to a deeper part of our mind, and it's simply absorbing that atmosphere and what's evoked from these works may be even more important than being able to decode specific references or symbols within the works. All right, now we can take a brief look at what we know of as a few of the important esoteric sources for her work. Not anything even remotely complete, and not necessarily even the most important for her, but I think a few of these were particularly important. And one of those is the first one on the list here, Kurt Seligman's book, The Mirror of Magic. We mentioned Seligman in the video on surrealism. He was a surrealist painter and involved in the surrealist movement, one of the main, or perhaps the primary expert on esotericism for that earlier generations of surrealists. His book, The Mirror of Magic, which was published in 1948, was a big inspiration for Carrington, as well as a number of the other surrealists of that time. And also an important source of imagery. It's got a couple hundred illustrations in it. And we'll have to do a full-length video on this book really really great text. Another important source of imagery comes from the French writer Émile Guyot de Givry's illustrated anthology of sorcery, magic, and alchemy. De Givry was associated with the magical revival in France in the late 19th century, and associated with some of the important figures in that scene, which we can maybe talk about in a future video. You can find this book in an English translation. I actually stumbled across it in a used bookstore a few months ago and picked up a copy. Another important source of illustrations. So we get not just illustrations of alchemical woodcuts, images of magic circles, talismans, other things like that. But we also have quite a few images here of the older images of the sort of demonized concept of witches and the witches' Sabbath and pacts with the devil and things like that. And I think this ends up being an interesting source for Carrington, where instead of simply rejecting these images as as false images of women or of magic, I think in a number of interesting cases she appropriates those images for her own purpose. In particular, the motif of transformation, witches transforming into animals at the Sabbath, I think becomes an idea or an image that she uses for her own purposes and redeems and even sort of celebrates that, and even connects, I think, that to some of the sort of ecofeminist ideas that we see in a lot of her writings, which I think is a really interesting dimension, and resonates too with some of her appropriation of Christian or Judeo-Christian imagery, and her sort of satirizing of those things or appropriating elements and modifying them to express her own views and her own relationship, sometimes antagonistic relationship to those traditions. Next, the two books that are probably the two most important books for the 20th century, the Goddess movement. Gerald Gardner, more or less the father of the Wiccan religion. We know that his second book, The Meaning of Witchcraft, was an important source for her, and she actually translated this book for her friend Remedios Varo, who was unable to read English. Definitely a very important source for her. Also, Robert Graves' the book The White Goddess had a huge impact on Carrington, and we see a lot of imagery throughout her works drawn from that text. I think encountering these ideas, even if I think now we would want to push back against some of the historical claims that are made in those texts about the existence or survival of an ancient goddess-centered pagan cult that survived in secret underneath Christianity. I think the idea, the image of a divine feminine and of a magical and religion, closely connected to the earth and to the natural world, focused on the worship of a goddess, and the magical role and importance of women was an enormous inspiration for Carrington. And we can certainly see those images of women and women's magical power all throughout her work. Also, we know that in her alchemical studies, she studied some of Carl Jung's, which I realize I misspelled Carl here. That should be C-A-R-L, but I am too lazy to correct it. So just note that I've misspelled that there. Carl Jung's alchemical writings, we know, I don't know that she ever really adopted the Jungian sort of worldview, but we know that his later writings on alchemy were an important source for her alchemical knowledge and images. And then, as we mentioned, P.D. Uspensky was an important author for her, although, she remained something of an ambivalent relationship with those the Fourth Way groups. All right, so let's just look at a few examples of magic and witchcraft in her work. I think that some of the witchcraft images in particular really overlap with her long-standing interest in Celtic mythology. So the image on the right, we have Samhain there, Samhain being the traditional Celtic holiday that I believe it starts in the evening of October 31st and then extends into November 1st, so connected to Halloween or All Saints' Day. Of course, also related, I think, especially when she got to Mexico, she would have also, linked that to the, to the Day of the Dead. So these holidays associated with, either with contact with the deceased, or when the veil between the worlds became thin. But then, Samhain is also part of the modern Wiccan, sacred calendar as one of the 8, holidays of the year. I think that's a place where this, esoteric and interest and her interest in modern witchcraft, intersected with that interest in the sort of Celtic and Irish legacy in her family there, and on her mother's side of the family, I think in particular, which was important to her. In the image on the left, Sacrament at Minos, we see a number of magical and alchemical images of a variety of magical beings, symbolic processes. We see 2 magical eggs, one being sort of fed by blood down at the bottom there with these beings. A lot sort of going on there, but again, just I think if nothing else, we can appreciate the ritual atmosphere here, and that we are, witnessing these kind of almost diagrammatic depictions of different rituals, and we can, trace out the different events happening. We see a kind of angelic or a winged being there, carrying an egg, up from the bottom portion, up through a hole into the upper portion of the structure that we see there. All right, so we'll come back to magic in just a moment here, but we also need to mention the prevalence of astrological imagery and symbolism throughout a lot of her works. So in the work on the left, this was not a really completed finished painting, but something that she was working on. This is actually a design for, or one of several designs that she did for the tarot cards, and we'll talk in just a few minutes about her interest in the tarot and its importance in her work. But just highlighting the astrological significance and the astrological symbols that we see here. So obviously the sun itself we see in the upper portion, and we see the sun's rays sort of extending outwards. In one example of what we've already seen a few times of these kind of geometric structures or images of sort of different radiating planes connecting different aspects of her paintings, or different areas within the images that she's creating. So the sun here. Here we see the glyph of Mercury on the forehead of this sort of stag-like being. I think we also perhaps see in the beard of this being what appears to me rather like a lyre, the instrument there, and so this may be a reference to cosmic harmony. The images of the strings of the lyre is a really ancient Greek and Pythagorean imagery for cosmic harmony, which the sun was also associated with. Apollo it's actually in the Greek myth that Hermes is the inventor of the lyre, and then gifts it to Apollo, who is associated with the sun. So there's some mythological imagery going on here. At the bottom, we see the glyphs of the planets. So here we have Venus, and then the moon, and then Mars, and then Jupiter, and Saturn, and then Uranus and Neptune. So we have the planets arranged here, and we see the planets as plants. So there may even be a pun between plant and planet, but we see them growing up from this sort of golden soil, as if nourished by the rays of the sun. And in the center here, I think the green here is certainly an image of the earth being nourished by the sun and the waters. I think we could certainly interpret this small sort of mauve circle as the moon. We already saw the color mauve associated with the moon in down below. And of course, the moon we see it also here, but no reason it can't appear in two different locations in the work. The moon being associated with water, and fertility, and so we see this sort of apparatus here, or kind of fountain that is watering the earth, as if the combination of the solar rays, the light and heat of the sun, combined with the moisture of the moon, produces the fertility of the earth. Though we also see this spiraling dark figure here, which is reminiscent of other figures that we see throughout her work, of images of kind of shadow figures, or a dark or threatening sort of aspect, as if within this image of cosmic harmony and benevolence and life, there is also a destructive or threatening aspect included within the whole, or perhaps included within the overall cosmic harmony. On the right, this is an interesting painting with symbolism here of the constellation Scorpio. So in the upper portion of the painting, we see a version of the constellation of Scorpio. The large red circle in the center would designate the star Antares, or Cor Scorpionis, the heart of the scorpion, which is the bright star in the center of Scorpio, which has a very red light and appears actually very similar to Mars, and Mars being the ruling planet of the sign of Scorpio. And then this, we see something of an angelic, sort of very strange, sort of angelic being here, reminiscent of some of the angels, from the Old Testament, either from, Revelation or the book of Ezekiel, and how sort of strange and monstrous and otherworldly those angels can be. The angel's legs here are the tails of a scorpion, one that seems to be dripping blood, and the other water. We also see the angel covered in eyes and various geometric figures. We also see on the angel's hand here, we see the equation E equals mc squared, which is something you see in a lot of her works, that E equals mc squared appearing along with other kind of magical symbols and images, which I think is quite interesting to almost think of that as a kind of modern magical formula, and the power that it contains, and even its association with nuclear power, right? Being the formula associated with that. All right, and then here we have a very complex image. We see, first of all, various hybrid and magical beings populating the work, as we see in so many of her works. But I just wanted to highlight a few of the astrological components of this image. So this wheel here that we see behind the central two figures, we also see a hexagram inscribed within it, so a six-pointed figure, and then around the hexagram we also have the 12 signs of the zodiac listed. So here we have a cosmological diagram. We see various magical writings here. This large hyena with her pups apparently around her also has the glyph of the moon over her head, and we see the stars. I think this is a really complex image, and there's a number of other things going on here that we won't go all the way into, but just showing the incorporation of astrological images and their significance and their integration into these large cosmological diagrams that she's producing. Right, and then combining together magic and astrology, we have a work that I think not only refers to astrological magic, but I think could absolutely be understood as an actual magical working in the form of a painting, that there's an actual magical intention to invoke this angelic being, Sakiel. So we see, Sakiel here dominating the painting and seeming to sort of rise upward through these complex intersecting spaces or geometric planes. I think this is a nice example of her use of geometry and space in a very complex way. It doesn't, I think the different intersecting planes don't resolve into a coherent sense of space as we understand it, which to me anyways, I think really calls up, the idea of hidden dimensions or hidden planes or hidden, aspects of reality that we are not able to ordinarily perceive. I get the impression of Sakiel, this being rising up through these planes, and then the head of the being here lies on this flat sort of plane that seems to be created here, as if this is like kind of an upper surface, and then the underside is the sort of hidden dimensions, and this being is now sort of impinging into this upper space here, as if sort of called forth or emerging into the world or into this upper space here. We also see in this upper space this sort of circular black area here, which, if we zoom in on the lower left-hand corner of this space, we see the magical sigil of the angel Sakiel. So this angel and these sigils are drawn from the Heptameron, which is a traditional magical grimoire that focuses on these 7 angels attributed to the 7 days of the week and the corresponding planets for each of the days. So Thursday, is the day of Jupiter, and so Sakiel is not just the angel of Thursday, but also a Jovian or Jupiterian angel. Here we see the sigils in the Heptameron. So we see obviously the name of the angel Sakiel, and along this top line we have the glyph of the planet Jupiter, and then the glyphs for the sign of Sagittarius as well as Pisces. The 2 signs that Jupiter rules. And then along the bottom, we have this sigil, or this kind of 3-part sort of sigil of Sakiel, which is used to invoke this being, which are exactly, again, it's a little hard to see with this low resolution image, but those are exactly the sigils that we see in the painting. And then we also have Zebul, which is the name of the 6th heaven that is ruled by Jupiter. I think the inclusion of these sigils and her drawing on a magical grimoire certainly suggests a definite magical intention in this work. All right, and now on the left we have a painting from 4 years earlier. This is Song of Gomorrah, which, just in saying Song of Gomorrah, I hadn't said it out loud, may actually be the song of might be a bit of a pun on Sodom and Gomorrah, right? This is obviously a depiction of the city Gomorrah, from the Old Testament. One of the Sodom and Gomorrah, the 2 sinful cities that were destroyed by God. But here we have her, depicting Gomorrah as a kind of paradise, a sort of image with female magical beings, and like the buildings covered in plants. We see cats and birds and other animals all over, as if this is some kind of harmonious, ecological, feminist sort of city. And I think it's just another nice example of her taking biblical images or references, and rewriting them and reimagining them. Certainly resonating with some of what we said already about her interest in goddess traditions and, these ideas of ancient, like goddess-centered cultures and religions that were, not just feminist or egalitarian, but also deeply, ecological and integrated with the natural world, as something that was destroyed by patriarchal monotheistic religions. And I think as within that context, it's really interesting to see not just the sigil of the angel Sakiel and the glyph of Jupiter, but actually the sigils of all 7 of the angels of the days of the week in order. So from the solar angel of Sunday, we have then, and we see in each one the glyph of the associated planet. So in order of the days of the week: Sunday, Monday, Tuesday with Mars, Wednesday, Mercury, Thursday, Jupiter, Friday, Venus, and then Saturn for Saturday. So the sort of the full complement of time, perhaps all 7 days of the week being sacred rather than just the one day of the week that we get in the Judeo-Christian tradition, or the full complement of the cosmic powers, which I think also resonates with the image of the stringed musical instrument that we see there, which as we already said in that design for the tarot card of the sun, can certainly be taken as an image of cosmic harmony. Each one of the strings, I think, if I'm counting correctly, there's 8 strings on that instrument there, which maybe refers to the 7 planets plus the Earth. I'm not sure exactly, but is an image of cosmic harmony and integration there. Let's see. Also in this image, I think this is quite interesting, and this is an image we will see again in just a few moments. We see this sort of female being here holding a sword and decapitating herself and lifting off her own head, and blood streaming from her neck there, which is an image that I feel pretty confident that Carrington is drawing from tantric imagery. So on the right there, we see an image of the Indian goddess Chinnamasta, Indian tantric goddess who is decapitating herself, and we see the streams of blood not only pouring into her own mouth, but also into the mouths of her 2 devotees there. This is a really complex image with a lot of different interpretations. This image, this goddess Chinnamasta is also taken up into the Tibetan tantric tradition, where she's understood as a what do you call it, kind of an aspect, I think you could say, of Vajrayogini, who's a very important magical being in the Buddhist tantric tradition. So it's possible that I don't know, Carrington either encountered it there in her studies of Tibetan Buddhism. Perhaps I think one important dimension of the symbolism here is of the loss of the ego, or the abolition of the individual identity, which is something I think we see all throughout her work, and we'll definitely encounter again later in this video when we look at an essay of hers called "What is a Woman?" We'll see her interrogating the solid, definite individual identity, which is something that certainly resonates with her Buddhist studies. And it's just interesting to see that appearing here, and maybe also there's some sense that this kind of feminist, ecological, pagan, magical paradise here of Gomorrah is somehow opposed to the kind of egocentric religion or the egocentric societies, associated with patriarchal monotheism, which I think is a very potent idea and expression here. All right, and then we definitely need to take a look at alchemy in Carrington's works. We find alchemical references and images all throughout both her paintings and her writings, and we'll see quite a few alchemical references in her 2 longer writings, the novella The Stone Door and the novel The Hearing Trumpet, which have some alchemy plays an important role in both of those narratives. But we also see alchemical references all throughout her paintings. Here's a great example. This is the Chrysopoeia of Mary the Jewess. So Chrysopoeia means gold making, right? And this is, of course, one of the famed endeavors of the alchemists. Mary the Jewess was, I'm not sure what the scholarly consensus is these days about whether she was a real person or not. A lot of early alchemists were mythical or legendary figures. I'm not sure about that. We may also have kind of a conflation of 2 different early alchemical women. There's an early important alchemical text known as the Chrysopoeia of Cleopatra, Nothing to do with the Queen Cleopatra, like Cleopatra and Antony, but just another early alchemist. So I think Cleopatra is understood to be a legendary figure. So yeah, possibly combining those two together, which is rather interesting. We see Mary the Jewess herself depicted kind of in the lower center there as a sort of centaur or hybrid creature, which is quite interesting. That depiction that she herself is a kind of unification of human and animal, itself a sort of combination of opposites, and also giving her obviously a fantastic magical quality. So you see a number of other magical figures, various forms of symbolic or cosmological looking diagrams throughout the painting. One of the buildings that we see in the background is in the form of an alchemical vessel. We see a black goose, which is a common symbol in Carrington's work. The goose is sometimes understood as the magical or the bird that corresponds to Hermes or is sacred to Hermes. So we certainly have that possible reference there. I think in some of her other paintings that the black goose has other significances as well. I think that's a complex and intriguing image that we find throughout a lot of her works. We also see to the left of Mary the Jewess there, on the left side of the painting, a group of three, rabbis or Kabbalists there who have gathered around to observe her gold making. A lot going on in this painting for sure, and I think a really beautiful example and really nice example of the really luminous colors that Carrington's able to achieve in some of her best works. All right, here we have the painting The Conjurer. Obviously a magical reference here, and his appearance is similar to the magician or the juggler of the tarot, so possibly a tarot, I think very definitely a tarot reference here as well. But in addition to being a magical practitioner, I also just wanted to highlight the color scheme that we see here because it is very common in a lot of Carrington's works, where we see a lot of black and white, and the combination of black and white being another form of the opposites. I think that's an easy thing to pay attention to in her works, both figures who are either or images that are entirely black or entirely white and their relationship to each other, and then also with particularly magical or powerful beings, often combine black and white as the Conjurer here does. This very sort of carefully worked out color scheme that we've got here, where both the clothes as well as the head, and even this magical sort of six-armed monkey with an extremely long tail that we see sitting on the Conjurer's arm there, all having this interchange of black and white, symbolizing the unification of opposites. Now, in a lot of times, also in Carrington's works, we'll see the extension of the black and white to a triad of black, white, and red. Now, this is a very definite alchemical reference, referring to at least in some models of alchemy, it's divided up into three stages. Sometimes this is expanded. You'll get like black, white, yellow, red in some versions. So there's more elaborate versions, but black, white, red is a very common alchemical sequence where the black is the nigredo, the process of dissolution and decomposition, and then white, the process of purification, and then finally the red, the reunification of the separated elements and the production of the philosopher's stone or the elixir. So this is a very common color scheme throughout Carrington's works, and I think an important and a nice key to I think interpreting and starting to make sense of a lot of the imagery that we see in her works is the alchemical symbolism of those three colors. But I think primarily, especially with the black and white, we're just looking at an image of the opposites, not necessarily associating each color with a particular process, but just an image of the separated or combined opposite qualities, and then their full unification into the red. All right, and here we see, again, some of the combination of black and white in this, what appears to be some sort of an order of perhaps monks or nuns The tent in the desert and the head coverings possibly recalls, things like the burqa or the, Islamic dress. Though, yeah, they also appear to be some sort of religious order. I think this sort of thing is fairly common in Carrington, where you feel like there's a number of possible references, but it's hard to place them specifically. A lot of different associations are called up by the figures, but they remain somewhat enigmatic. But we certainly get the sense of some sort of religious rite or ritual or operation is occurring here. In addition to the combination of the black and white garb, we also see in the center, the ritual that seems to be going on here is a couple in a bed. So definitely calling to mind images of the alchemical union, which is often depicted as the sexual union of the sun and the moon, or the male and the female, the king and the queen. But they are here portrayed as red and blue. Now, the red and blue have a few different references. I think probably, especially for modern practitioners, we might immediately think of fire and water, which are certainly another version of the separated opposites. Fire would be associated with the solar. Now, typically that would be associated with the male, where blue, the water, would be associated with the lunar. But here we have the genders interchanged, and we see that the blue figure has a beard. So we have a kind of swapping of the normal attribution, which itself I think is an interesting move on her part. Sometimes blue is also an alchemical color associated with the moon in older sources, though that, of course, exactly lines up, where red is a very common image of gold. The red is like the heraldic equivalent of gold. Blue in some alchemical emblems and allegorical images is used as a lunar color. So yeah, we see the sort of mystical marriage of the opposites here in the bed. And we also see a figure appear just to the kind of lower left hand corner of the bed with what appears to be a cloak. And now it's colored purple, which of course is the combination of the colors of red and blue. So possibly this will be the garb if they are united into a single being, or perhaps if they produce a child. Not exactly clear what's going to happen, but the purple cloak seems to certainly indicate their union or unification. We also have on the left-hand side a really intriguing figure of a sort of hyena with a single, or hyena-headed being with a single red leg, but walking on crutches there, which I think defies easy interpretation, but is really quite intriguing. And the title here, The Lovers, is of course a reference to the tarot card, The Lovers. So we also have a tarot reference being incorporated here as well. We also see the presence of a number of animals in the scene. So there's quite a lot going on. Really, in some sense, a fairly simple scene, but quite rich, and also very enigmatic and intriguing. All right, and then we have a really wonderful painting here. This is the Garden of Paracelsus. Paracelsus, of course, is a major alchemist from the 16th century, and we see Paracelsus there. We can recognize him by the bald head in the very center in white, holding an egg. Let's see, we see several other eggs appearing in the painting, that again being a really ubiquitous symbol in Carrington's works. Also, as I mentioned, we see again this image of the decapitated figure we see two here in this painting, one black and one white, over on the lower right-hand side of the painting, who have both removed their heads, and we see blood or vital fluid, spouting forth from their necks, as again in that painting of Chinnamasta. Now here they're actually holding their heads in front of each other, as if to suggest a kind of exchange or a sort of countercharging of the black and the white, which is also, I think, a very intriguing reference here. If we think again of the image of decapitation as a sort of overcoming of the individual identity, the individual closed off self, this kind of exchanging or countercharging, seeing the self and the other, or a kind of exchange of identity with the other, I think is quite interesting, especially in the context of an explicitly alchemical painting here. There's a lot else going on here. We see mythical creatures, various figures. We see pairings of black and white creatures. Paracelsus himself there in the center is talking to a black sort of angel or magical being, perhaps. We also see stars and constellations in the sky and magical birds, magical texts and other magical creatures. A really rich painting. And, sometimes with these more, this isn't quite monochromatic, but tending towards monochromatic images of Carrington, I find them a little less intriguing than the more colorful works. But I think this is a really beautiful example of that more monochromatic style that we see her using frequently. All right, so we're going to break here for part one, or the newly formed or the newly conceived part one, as I mentioned in the newly recorded intro. Recording these things out of order makes me feel like a time traveler, like I'm talking to you from the future. I'm actually talking to you from the past, though, aren't I? But in any case, we're going to break off part one here, and we'll continue on in part two with the tour through the themes in her work. And then we'll also look at the stone door in part two. And then in part three, we'll look at the hearing trumpet. And hopefully, although I'm sure this recording is now confusing, it'll make more sense and be a little more digestible in the end. So stay tuned for part two. Hopefully that will follow in less than a week, and we can try to catch up a little bit and get back on schedule here. Thanks for watching. Please stay tuned for part two, and see you then. Bye.